What do we do during the moments in our awakening journey when we lose our footing, when the ground beneath us, which once felt so certain, starts to churn, when we start to move through really challenging emotional content, when we're moving through and processing trauma, when we're superseding a belief system, when we're changing and evolving in our physical circumstances, and all of a sudden we're thrown into confusion, chaos, disorientation, and generally feeling as though what felt certain before no longer feels certain. These are often characterized as dark night of the soul moments, the moments when we feel like we're moving through an ego death of some kind, and we struggle to grasp for tools, resources, practices, habits that really support us, because it often feels as though whatever we try doesn't really help, because what worked for us before may not work for us anymore. This also applies if you're moving through a rapid shift, a quantum shift on your journey. Maybe you've broken through a lot of limiting beliefs and you've moved through a really significant change in your reality, internally, externally, and then you find yourself in this space of suspended animation where you're kind of hovering in limbo between the old and the new, trying to process so many different things at once. This can feel like a really disorientating time as well. In today's video, I'd like to offer my perspective on where we can land during these times of change and transition, during these times when our consciousness is expanding and it can feel quite unsettling to the personality or the ego structure. I'd like to explore what's really fundamental as a tool in our spiritual toolkit that we can come back to as our foundation, as our fundamental go-to place when everything else seems to feel redundant or in some way dissolves in terms of our ability to truly feel its impact. So if you are moving through a dark night of the soul, an ego death, a state of contraction, or you're simply feeling lost, confused, or unsettled on your journey, this video is for you. Hello and welcome to Temple of Akasha, the home of embodied spirituality with me, Natasha. I hope whoever is in the apartment next to me seemingly rearranging furniture isn't too off-putting for today's video. So I've been taking a leave of absence from my social media platforms lately and my work, and there has been a reason for that. I have been moving through a very profound internal shift, moving through a lot of challenging emotional content, a lot of very intense Kundalini activity, and generally trying to play catch up with my consciousness with regards to the significant shifts that have occurred in my life in a very short space of time. I have described this process of feeling like one of those cartoon characters that runs off a cliff and their body moves and you see the cloud of smoke behind them, and then you see the shadow of them or the outline of where they were, because they've moved so quickly it's as though a part of them is still in that place where they were to begin with. That's how I feel, that part of my consciousness has moved, my physical body has moved, part of my consciousness has landed in this new experience of reality, and part of me is still processing in the infinite, trying to understand how to land in this new space, both externally but also within myself. And me navigating this significant shift and this significant process has really inspired a very curious and mindful exploration of how I move out of those states of disorientation, confusion, loss, apathy, depression even, which I have been dipping in and out of, just really struggling to both hold states of awareness and also be very compassionate with the parts of me that are processing a lot. And so during this process, I've been kind of mindfully observing, what do I do to help myself come back to a place that feels safe within my being, a place where I can rest in amongst all of the change and disruption, disillusion, birthing, etc. And that's really what I want to share with you today, because this personal process that I've been moving through has illuminated that I always return to the same place, to the same level of awareness, to the same realizations, and to the same practices over and over and over again. and I can finally distill my process in this video for you in the hope that it also supports you. So what I'm going to share today is not new. This is content and this is insight that has been widely shared in the spiritual community, but I think it's really important to highlight this, especially in relation to challenging times during our spiritual awakening journey, because I think these basic and fundamental teachings, learnings on our spiritual journey are often overlooked in favor of other more elaborate practices that aren't really necessary. If you're moving through an ego death, a dark night of the soul moment, depression, spiritual depression and apathy, or you're navigating a quantum shift and you're feeling very disorientated, as I have been, what I'm going to share today, I feel, is the absolute fundamental foundational principle of not just the times of change, but actually for our entire spiritual journey. But I tend to only really notice the impact of what I'm going to share with you today when I'm navigating those times of change or feeling very tumultuous within myself. If you're moving through an awakening journey and you're really doing your inner work, or you're on a Kundalini path, you will often experience intense emotional, physical, or psychological disruption. So the kind of impact on our humanity is real. We experience real disruption, real chaos, real and often very confusing and debilitating states that are very hard to navigate. So I want to speak to that really plainly, because it's important to recognize that in our human experience, and especially on an awakening journey, we are experiencing and moving through sometimes tremendously challenging content. So during those moments, what do? It can often feel as though we're on a sand dune and we can't grasp for anything, and the ground beneath us is moving and churning and dissolving, and there is nothing for us to hang on to, nothing for us to grasp. It can feel as though we're in an ocean and desperately trying to grasp for air, but the waves keep taking us down and under. I know these spaces all too well. I've been on this journey for 8 years consciously. And during that time, I've moved through very significant mental health challenges, as well as being on a Kundalini awakening journey, a very intense Kundalini awakening journey for over 4 years now. And so these moments have been common for me. And every single time I'm back in those spaces of change, or feeling very unsettled within my being or in my reality, it's like another revolution of the spiral of awareness. I'm shown more clearly what works and what doesn't. And so from this most recent journey that I've been on, what I'd like to share is this. We cannot underestimate the power of presence. I started my spiritual journey with mindfulness. Mindfulness was my go-to practice. Observing the ego was what I really was focused on for the beginning part of my journey. I also took up yoga as a practice and started integrating the many limbs of yoga into my day-to-day life. And so mindfulness and yoga have been foundational for me in terms of my personal journey. And what I come back to during these moments of change and transition is that there was great wisdom in the divine leading me to those paths first. Because when we're moving through an expansion of consciousness and there's a tremendous amount of change within us, we must be able to expand the container of our awareness to hold and observe everything we're experiencing with love, so that we don't get lost in it or drown in it. And so actually having our foundation in our ability to observe the mind, to be present, to be mindful, not just to be able to sit in meditation, but to be able to apply what we reap from meditation, which is a spacious mind, which is the ability to observe thoughts and not identify with them, and actually take that into our day-to-day life. That's absolutely essential for our emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical health. And so this is for me, the most fundamental principle on our spiritual journey. And I have spoken about this in another video before, which I'll link somewhere up here. But for today's video, I really want to emphasize the importance of truly cultivating a mindfulness practice, because above anything else you will learn on your spiritual journey, this will be the vehicle, your awareness, your ability to be present, to be able to expand beyond your limited idea of yourself. This will be the vehicle that will truly accelerate your spiritual journey, but also return you to the truth of who you are. I had an experience maybe 2 weeks ago when I was in a tremendous amount of physical pain. I was experiencing a lot of Kundalini activity. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning. The earth was being pummeled with solar flares, as it has been a lot recently, and I was really feeling this process. And it was in the middle of the night, and I was rolling around, and I just decided to surrender to the fact that I was in pain. And instead of judging the pain and resisting the pain, I decided to just put my headscarf over my head, which I often do to help, seal the energy, especially around my crown, and to bring some containment to my energy. And I just decided to meditate on the pain, to meditate with my body, to no longer be at odds with the experience. And when I did that, something quite profound happened. All of a sudden, it was as though a much greater force than my own egotistical self came in and just, like a vacuum, sucked all of the content out of my mind, and there was just pure silence. And I realized how busy my mind had been, like the background noise of a TV that's in the other room, because I'm quite used to being mindful. I thought, yeah, I'm observing my mind. I've got a good handle on my mind. But this is an ongoing practice. Our ability to observe the mind and to be present is an ongoing practice. It's not something that we do once and it sticks. This is a day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience, and something that we have to tend to and nurture for the rest of our spiritual journey, until perhaps we reach a stage when that becomes our natural state, as it normally is, before all the conditioning and all of the content fills our systems. And so I reached this stage of spaciousness, of quiet, of stillness, and it was so liberating. It was so liberating to finally rest in peace, to rest in stillness. And when the mind tries to digest that idea of stillness and spaciousness, the mind has a lot of resistance to stillness and spaciousness. It feels scary, it feels like void space, it feels empty. But when we're truly in those states, they're full, they're rich, they are freeing. And so from that moment, about 2 weeks ago, I have been really focusing on presence, of actually choosing to make my most fundamental and consistent spiritual practice just being here now. And the guidance that kept coming to me as I was moving through this process in the last 2 weeks was, don't touch the mind. Do not touch the mind. It's as though once we start to even entertain the thoughts we have or judgments, we get stuck in this swirling mass of content. And we can think we're being mindful. We can think we're thinking positively. We can think that we're being loving to ourselves. But naturally, because the mind is so linked to the ego structure, we slowly get sucked back into this smallness, to this stuck space, to this limited self. And so the first thing I want to offer as a practical embodiment tool in the light of this is for you to actually descend your awareness to the base of your body, to the lowest chakra, the root chakra. Whenever you notice that you have got lost in the mind, lost in judgments, lost in the swirl of the content of the mind. So I invite you in those moments when you're observing to take a deep breath, and as you exhale, sending the awareness all the way down, so you are embodying this vehicle fully. Because what tends to happen is when we're operating a lot from the mind or from an unmindful place, our awareness tends to be in the upper centers. We tend to be somewhat disembodied. We tend not to be rooted fully in our body and therefore in the present moment. So what's actually incredibly helpful is just to notice, okay, I was lost for a moment. Observe that. Take a deep breath, a cleansing breath to come back into the spaciousness of the body. As you exhale, slowly sinking the awareness all the way down to the base of the tail and into the legs and feet. What this helps us to do is to truly root and land in the present moment, so that it doesn't feel like something that's a task, because sometimes rooting in the present can feel, there can be resistance to that. It can feel like we're trying to be present, but there's still some part of us fighting that. And that's because we're not fully embodied in our presence. So actually bringing the awareness and that presence all the way down to the lower centers, the lower chakras, and all the way down into the legs and feet is really, really helpful. It really helps to anchor us in that presence, in spaciousness, and helps tremendously with creating some space from the mind. And then from this space of presence, from this space of being anchored in the here and now, being anchored in this spacious state where we're not being dogged by thoughts and judgments, we have the ability to be truly attuned to what's most needed, what's most desired, what we're most being invited to move up and through us in the present moment. I found that since I've been really anchored in presence over the last few weeks, the process of moving very challenging emotional content has been much more easeful, because what tends to happen is we will feel a challenging emotion, we'll feel emotional density, we'll feel something that feels really difficult to meet with presence and love, and then we'll judge it. If we're feeling grief or anger, we judge the grief and the anger, we go straight to the mind, so out of the body, and then that actually acts as kind of like an intermediary and stops the natural process of us just feeling the emotion and letting it move in whatever way it wishes to do that. It actually interrupts the natural intelligence of the body, where if we're feeling anger, perhaps we want to shake. If we're feeling great grief, perhaps we need to sob. You know, it interrupts that natural process and the intelligence that just wants to move energy and gets us stuck here. So when we anchor in a presence practice, and we're doing so with a real intention to anchor in a fully embodied, loving presence, it means that we can meet the experiences of the present moment within ourselves and in our reality, physical reality, with a lot more ease and a lot more dynamism and flow, which is ultimately the invitation of life, because everything is always changing in each and every moment. The awareness that we occupy in response to the changes of life is infinite and it's unwavering. And that's where we can rest. That's our safe haven in response to the changeable, transitory nature of being human, of our physical existence. And so that to me is fundamental. That's foundational. Our presence practice, our ability to expand the container of our awareness to hold our humanity, is fundamental on the spiritual journey. If we can cultivate this as a practice regularly, often, and implement it as the foundations of our spiritual practice, then we truly have the vehicle for real illumination and real self-mastery. And then from this space, when we're navigating these times of change, of transition, of the dark night of the soul, the ego death, the times when we're losing our footing, we can start to really tend to ourselves from a place of presence and our needs with a lot more love and attunement. So what tends to happen is we'll enter a period of darkness, a period of feeling confused, lost, disorientated, unsure. We'll be moving through really challenging content. We won't feel as though we've got anywhere solid to land because we're in that space of transition. And then we'll start resorting to old habits, we'll fall on old behaviors that actually don't support us, that aren't truly meeting our deepest needs. And that actually then further creates a loop of self-betrayal. And it means that we're actually hurting ourselves during the times when we most need to be loving with ourselves. So from our place of presence, we can then start to truly lean in and say, in this moment, without all the chatter and the nonsense of the mind, because most of it's just garbage, we can actually lean in and listen to right now, what is it that this body, this heart, this being needs? And it might be actually, I want really simple, plain food. I want to move my body, I want to exercise, I want to get out in nature. I need to cry, you know, I need to speak to someone, I need a hug. There could be a myriad of things that we connect with when we're in presence that are actually, it's a very organic way in which we can soothe ourselves and love ourselves. And it means that we are actually truly practicing self-love, which to me means meeting our basic needs, values, upholding our boundaries, you know, making sure that we're moving towards the things that really matter to us and upholding those things. It means that we can really move from a place of self-love instead of reinforcing cycles of self-betrayal, which happen when we're unmindful during these times of transition. And so another practice that might be helpful if you struggle with mindfulness is to set a timer on your device, maybe for 5 minutes, and set the intention to meditate. However you wish to do that, there are of course many different types. You could do a Vipassana body scan, you know, you could do a transcendental meditation with mantra, you could simply follow the breath. And during your meditation, every single time you come across a thought and you observe your thought, I invite you to take a notebook and a pen and write that thought down and then come back to your meditation practice. This is like a mind dump, you know, and it's very helpful when we're just beginning to practice observing the mind, because it can often feel quite an obscure space when it's all just up here. We can often lose the thought, or we might get lost in the thought. And so this is a really helpful practice to just observe, dump the thought so it's not rolling around up here. It may be helpful, it may not be. You can find out after your meditation, and then you can come back to your presence practice. And what's interesting is, with an exercise like this, you'll often be able to observe how much content of the mind is judging ourselves, judging other people, judging our experience. It's often limiting, it's often fear-based, and then you can start to truly see how much of your consciousness is either helping you thrive or helping you to remain stuck, stagnant, or even in states of degeneration. And this is really the ultimate point of us being mindful. It's so that we can actually come back to the place of being truly conscious creators of our reality. You know, we were made in God's image. We have the ability to be powerful creators on this planet, visionaries. You know, we are the arms, the eyes, the hands of God. We're here to create something truly wonderful, miraculous, loving, unified on this planet. But it starts with us being able to disentangle ourselves from the old programming, the old habits, the old stories, the old limitations. And our mindfulness practice is fundamental to that. And so, to summarize, our presence practice, mindfulness, really fundamental when we are in those states of change and transition that feel quite gnarly. Being able to meet our basic and most fundamental needs, the needs of the body, the needs of the emotional body, the needs of our spiritual self. How do we wish to express? How do we wish to communicate with ourselves in the world? How do we wish to create, to move our life force energy? You know, these are just really basic things that as a society, which has become so unconscious, we've really tuned out of, and it's time to really tune back in to what's real, what's really needed. And then when we do this, we give ourselves really clear, stable ground, the grounding of our awareness to truly move from life in an empowered way, not from old habituated states, but from states that truly serve creation. And finally, what I'd like to add here is from our ability to be present and to tend to ourselves, we can then foster an attitude within our own being of loving ourselves, accepting ourselves, and surrendering to what's present. So surrendering is not synonymous with resignation. It's not the same as, you know, I'm feeling apathy and so I'm just going to resign myself to always feeling apathy. That's not what surrender truly means. Surrender means if you're feeling a certain state, can you allow that state to be there without judging it, without labeling it as wrong or bad, and just allow yourself to be present with that aspect of your consciousness. Just recognizing that it's another aspect of your allness. Usually it's a fragment of your consciousness, an aspect of yourself from the past that is arising to be met with loving presence. And it's amazing that when we give ourselves the space to do this, to meet our consciousness with awareness and presence and love and non-judgment, how much these energies can move through, up and out. But what's really beautiful is that the surrendering experience allows us to be married to the dynamic flow of life and energy, rather than in resistance to it. So much of our suffering is really self-created, it's self-generated. It reminds me of that quote, suffering is optional. And it's optional because it's only present when we resist the pain of what we're experiencing, the discomfort of what we're experiencing, when we're meeting our fear with fear, when we're meeting our anxiety, our emotional content, our physical content with resistance. But actually, we are being invited to marry our humanity and our divinity in this experience. Can we hold this fragile, fallible human with infinite love and awareness? That is the greatest invitation, I believe, that we have on this planet. To hold this reality of change and transition, of death, of rebirth, of dynamism, to hold this with an unwavering, loving awareness. So I hope this was a helpful video for you. I hope it was clarifying. I'm wishing you peace, love, clarity on your journey of awakening. And I really look forward to connecting with you again in the next video. A little reminder that if you're not already subscribed to my channel, I invite you to do so if you found this rewarding. And if you feel that this content might help someone you know, please feel free to like and share. Take good care, and I'll see you again soon.